We're in week 2, our Cliff Diver series. I worked really hard about it. Sometimes I'm supposed to have some leadership role here in our church. Sometimes what I say just falls on deaf ears. So I told Christian, do not Photoshop someone else's face on my body for this artwork. You know what I'm saying? Don't do that. But he did anyway. And so y'all just see me there. But it's not my face. It's someone else's. I don't know who that kid is. I needed him on my team for guys' night last night, though, that's for sure. Because we lost. Team Black's in the house. Is Team Black in the house? Did Team Black win last night? No, they didn't. Team Red won. How about that? Where's Matt Gwynn? Matt, are you in here? Matt, you stand up for a second. This was MVP of his team last night in dodgeball. He was a sauce. I'm telling you, he was playing dodgeball last night. Like I think people just assumed, okay, he's got a beard, had a fancy hat on, and he did have dress pants on. So I told people, I said, he wore dress pants because he's going to your funeral. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he put it on them boys. Woo! Hey, we're in this series, and we're talking about faith, James chapter 2. I want to give you a brief recap to catch you up if you were here last week, and we're going to dive into this week. Last week, we kind of talked about James. We reestablished him. We had talked about James previously, James chapter 1, earlier on in the year, and we're going to continue our walk through James kind of sporadically, and we're in James chapter 2. James was the brother of Jesus. And so he writes this. He's the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and he's writing this letter to the church that's scattered because of persecution, right? But he's writing this letter to the church, and so he has some authority. He didn't believe in Jesus until after the resurrection, and in fact, he thought Jesus was crazy. Jesus' entire life, he just thought, big brother, you've got a God complex, and he was kind of like half right. He was just he's God, and there's no complex with it. It was just the truth, And so that's what James was kind of pushing up against. And then he sees Jesus after the resurrection, and he believes. He's like, yeah, I can't doubt this because I watched you crucified, right? I was there. My mom saw it, right? The whole thing. And so he begins to write this letter. And in chapter 2, he starts to talk about this word called faith. And he begins to talk about this word called faith. And the way we kind of put it last week is faith is kind of like a heart that's pumping, right? It's an essential piece of who you are as a person, but more specifically, in terms of just giving life, like actual physical, biological life, you have to have a heart. And so faith is that heart that's pumping. However, James goes so far to say, hey, that this intellectual thought process, this believing in Jesus, that's the heart pumping, but a heart that doesn't pump blood, if there's no blood to pump anywhere, then the heart is useless. Its primary function is to beat, but it beats and it pumps blood throughout the entire body, delivering oxygen and nutrients and blood flow to the rest of the body. So if there's no blood to pump, the heart has no purpose. In all, James went on to say that bloodless heart, or that workless or deedless or following, or that action-filled heart, or that actionless faith is dead. Well, I ask this question: do you think there will be anything dead in the kingdom of heaven? James just calls us out on it. He says, if you want to make an intellectual decision to follow Jesus, this assent that happens in your mind, and that's all you want to do, it's dead. Will there be anything dead in the kingdom of heaven? We know the simple answer to that. The answer is no. He then backs that up. He backs that up with demons even believe that Jesus is who he says he is. And we looked at 2 different places in the New Testament where there's this encounter that Jesus has, and the demons respond, and they say, you're the Holy One of God. You're the set-apart one of God. That they understand who Jesus is and what role he fills. So the demons have this faith. We established last week that the demons believe that Jesus died on the cross. They understand that Jesus is the Son of God, and they understand that Jesus resurrected from the dead. All those are truths that demons believe. And so that is not enough, is what James is saying. That is a heart pumping without any blood. Ultimately, we came away with this: following Jesus is quick and easy if you only have to run your mouth about it. That was the thing that really needed to hit home with us. If we want to be followers of Jesus, that at the end of the day, that's the truth. Following Jesus is quick and easy if you only have to run your mouth about it. I disclosed to you last week, sometimes my mouth gets me into trouble. Sometimes you can run your mouth about things, and it's not really who you are, what you want to be. It's just the easiest thing to do at the time. We concluded last week by looking and studying the Bible together that faith resides in your hands and feet as much as it does in your heart. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it depends on how you see it, we couldn't unpack the entirety of faith in 1 week. I only get 35 or so minutes to chat with you before you begin to revolt, right? And so this week we pick up where we left off. We're continuing through James chapter 2. He's just made the statement, so you believe there's one God. Great, demons believe that. Verse 20, that's where we'll pick up. James chapter 2, verse 20. James continues, read with me. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Remember, last week we talked about the word deeds. Sometimes you hear the word works associated with it. But in our context, for us to really play it out, it's the things that we do in and out of our life, right? It's the things that become a part of us. It's not the thoughts that we have. It's the actions we take. It's how we follow Jesus, what we do to follow Jesus. Clearly, when we read this verse in James chapter 2, verse 20, you foolish person, how do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Clearly, this is something that James is passionate about, right? Can you hear him just talking in this tone that's kind of being written? You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? In other words, he's saying, you know what? I feel like you're questioning my authority as the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and you're saying, look, just because I say it, it doesn't seem good enough for you, so you want evidence. He's about to give them some evidence. Likely he's dealing with a group of people that are pushing back against his leadership. This is a continuation of the same conversation we had last week. James is going to begin building a case for this thought that he's pushing forward. And the question becomes, who's the case being built for? It's for us. The case is being built for us as the church, as followers of Jesus, or prospective followers of Jesus. He's saying whether you follow Jesus already or you want to get into following Jesus, you need to understand these basic truths. That just because your heart beats, that doesn't actually sustain or create or anything with life. It's got to have something to pump. So he begins to make his case. He gives his proof. James 2:21. This is what he says. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? And so that's, if you're not a church person or you haven't been involved in Sunday school or anything like that in your life, then you're like, number one, who's Abraham and who's this Isaac? And he put him on an altar? Like, those are all really good questions. So I want to make sure we answer those. So if you were of a Jewish background, the name Abraham would be something incredibly significant to you. Sometimes he's called Father Abraham. He's the first guy that God has a covenant promise with. He comes to Abraham, he says, hey, I'm going to promise that everything I'm going to do in this world, all the way through Jesus, is going to come through your line and your lineage, right? So you're going to have a child, and they're going to have kids, and they're going to have kids, and eventually he even says you're going to have so many people that come from your line and lineage, you'll outnumber the stars in the heaven, right? Just tons and tons and tons of people, and everyone will be blessed through your family. That's what it says. Now here's the thing. When God makes him this promise, Abraham is an older gentleman, right? 75-ish years old when he gets this promise. And he doesn't have a child. And so they begin this conversation, and God says, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And so Abraham's like, well, God, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but I've gotten a little old here. You know, I don't have a kid for you to make this whole promise happen, right? And God says, well, that's what I'm going to do. This is what I've decided. This is what I'm going to do. 25 years, give or take. 25 years pass. He still doesn't have a kid, right? He's now nearly 100 years old. His wife, also nearly 100 years old. Nothing. And then one day, she got a baby bump. I don't know. Other than that, that's all I know. There's a baby bump. It's like, oh, what is that? Where did that come from? I don't have one, but I mean, kind of. I mean, you know what I'm saying. What is this? Finally, this son, in this old age. Honestly, I think God chose to do this just in case someone wanted to take credit for it. He was like, no, I'm going to wait until this is just ridiculous to think about, and that's when I'm going to work. So God goes to work, and here comes this baby boy. His name was Isaac. And Isaac was everything Abraham thought he would be. His pride and his joy. And he raised him, right? He raises this guy. And he loves on him like the son that he's supposed to be loved on, right? He's his everything. He's the promise of God fulfilled. He's Abraham's future. He's the people of God's future. Abraham begins to understand and identify himself with, hey, this is really, I'm the father of nations, and this is the first piece of that. And then God comes to him. And he says, hey, you know that son that you love so much? I want you to build an altar and sacrifice him to me. Abraham, all of a sudden, he waits a quarter of a century for the kid to show up. And now he's had the kid for quite some time. This promise, this identity, this who he is, this what he's lived for, everything he's got right here in this little baby boy. The baby boy's now big. He's a teenager, young adult. Right there. And God says, now give him back to me. And Abraham says, okay. So they pack up and they set out. God says, I'll show you the place. Just pack up and head that way. And so they pack up. They pack up the wood. It's going to be a burnt offering, which means he's going to kill him and then set it on fire. So they pack up the wood. He gets the knife. He has a few of his servants come with him, and they set out. Then in Genesis 22:5, we pick up, it says this. He said to his servants, this is Abraham talking, he said, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Are you beginning to see the faith of Abraham? If not, we put it in a funky color for you. Abraham has been asked, give me your son, right? Give me your son as a burnt offering. Pack the knife, pack the wood. Abraham says, yes, sir. He packs it up, and they start going. They go to the place. He sees the place where he's supposed to be. He tells the servants, y'all chill here. Me and the boy's going to go back. We're going to go to that place. We're going to do our thing. We'll be back. And then he goes. Now, I get it. Abraham is a little old, but he's not senile. He knows what happens when you stick a knife and set someone on fire, right? He understands what happens in that moment. But you're beginning to see the faith of Abraham. Abraham was convinced God doesn't break his promise. So one way or the other, if Isaac is who this line and lineage is coming from or coming through, well, that's God's problem. His problem is not to figure out how to allow God to keep his promise. Abraham's problem is, can I do what God asked me to do? That's a much easier burden to lift, isn't it? When we look at God and say, hey, God, you said you would be my provider. You said you'd be my provider, and I'm in a place right now where I don't feel provided for, right? It's not your job then to figure out how do I do what God wants me to do. No, your job is to say, what's next? What's the next step I need to take in line with what you want from me, God? That's a much easier burden to bear, isn't it? Let God do his thing. And so you just tell the folks, hey, y'all chill here. Me and the boys going that way. We'll be back. The fill in the blank is, I don't know how it's going to happen, but that's not my problem. That's his problem to figure out, right? That's what's happening. They start making their way up this mountain. And this little boy, Isaac, he asks his dad, he says, Abraham, he said, what? I see the knife, Dad, and I got the wood. But it says, where's the lamb? Where's what we're putting on this fire? See, the boy didn't know. Isaac didn't know. So Abraham answers, chapter 22, verse 8. Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. For Isaac, that was enough. In his mind, he's thinking about it. He's like, now, I've seen my dad do this a number of times. And there's three elements. You got to do something to kill the thing, something to burn it, and you got to actually have the thing that you're going to be killing and burning. And he looked around, and he's like, well, I see two or three. And so it's a natural question for a son to ask his dad. I've seen you do this a million times, right? Where's the third piece? Dad said, well, that's up to God. This next piece, I'm going to ask you a favor. Would you close your eyes as I read it? Just close your eyes as I read it. And I just want you to picture it happening. Put yourself in Abraham's shoes for a moment. And you just look through the eyes of Abraham. I'm going to read it. You just close your eyes and watch it happen in front of your mind's eye, right? When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Are you seeing it? You can open your eyes. Did you see that happen? I've got a little boy. Turned 8 last week. I don't know. It didn't stop there, though. Abraham's doing what he's doing because God asked him to. I don't know if his boy is looking up at him as this is happening. It doesn't say. The Bible doesn't say if his boy's screaming or saying, Dad, what are you doing? It simply just says, and Abraham raised the knife. And then 22:12 happens. A voice. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. You see, Abraham had a conversation with God previous. A conversation. Abraham believed that God was God. Jehovah, Yahweh. He believed he was God. He believed that God had a plan to save the world, even. He believed that God had a plan to save the world and that he was a part of the plan. Yet, God does not acknowledge his belief or his faith until that moment. Think about it. So when James is attempting to say, hey, here's the deal. You got a heart that beats, that's great. But if you ain't got no blood for it to pump somewhere, then it's just a dead beat heart. It's worthless. That's what James is attempting to frame with us. The true faith and actions are connected. James 2:22, let's jump back over to James. It says this, you see that his faith, he's talking about Abraham, you see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. The heart really becomes valuable to us inside of our being when it's got blood to pump. It does not have value to us as people if there's nothing for it to pump. His heart was pumping, but it wasn't empty. It was full of blood that rushed all over the body. Did you notice that it said his faith was completed by what he did? You see, I believe that faith can get started by a decision. However, it is completed by lifestyle. Faith begins with you making a decision. Hey, am I going to move in this direction? Am I really going to entertain the idea of me giving my entire life to Jesus? It begins with that decision. But then it's completed, brother of Jesus says, leader of the Jerusalem church, says it's completed by then what you do about that. It's completed. Faith and works, independent of one another, have no value. Let's just talk about social justice for a moment. Social justice without Jesus, you fight so hard for something, but in the end, it's so temporary. You might change what you're fighting against, but at the end of the day, if it's for one person and that person's life ends and there's no Jesus to be there with it, yeah, you improve their quality of life for maybe a few decades. But I think if you leave the Jesus piece out of it, God's going to say, what are they going to do with the rest of their time? If you could only free someone from one single solitary thing, don't choose the thing that only impacts them for the rest of this life here on earth. If you can only choose one, it's awesome if we can choose two or three, right? But if you can only choose one, choose the eternal. Don't choose the temporary. Which is why when we begin to look at needs in our community, it's not just about shoes on people's feet, or food in their bellies, or clothes on their backs, or lights on in their house, or help moving from one place to another, or conversations around a dinner table. It's not just about those things. It's about how all of those things frame us and reference to point and lead back to Jesus. That's the very first piece of our mission statement. There is nothing we do as a church that doesn't lead to Jesus. You see, it's pretty important for us to understand this. What you do is not who you are. Right? Follow me for a second. What you do is not who you are. Second piece, what you believe is also not who you are. However, when you put the two together, what you do and what you believe, that's who you are. Think about it for a second. What you do, completely independent of itself, that does not define who you are. These thoughts that are in your head, maybe these beliefs, completely independent of what you do with your life, if you just take those thoughts do not define you as a person. But when you mesh them together in this one thing, you kind of put it in a mixing bowl and you begin to mix it up, that becomes to give us a better picture of who you are. James 2:24, don't forget that. James 2:24, he says this, you see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. In other words, hey, if you've just got those thoughts, that's not going to do it for you. Now, he could inverse this and say the same thing. All you've got are these good things you're doing. That's not going to do it for you. But when you begin to allow the heart to pump the blood, at the end of the day, if you just got blood sitting in a body, it ain't going nowhere. It becomes stale and rots. The two have to work together. The two are connected. The two are interwoven with each other. You see this one line that I just read? You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. This creates controversy in our church. And I'm saying Big C Church. That one line right there. People become a little antsy. They say, well, which one saves us? You've got Paul on one hand, this apostle, this great church planter, who's saying just the opposite, it seems like. Where Paul's like, all you have to do is have this intellectual decision, and grace is enough. And then on the other hand, you got the brother of Jesus saying, no, bro, what are you talking about? And when you pit them against each other, you have this conflict within the Bible. And that's what happens when we take one line from here and one line from here and we run them into each other. We say, oh, that's neat. Look at the wreckage that just happened. When we don't recognize that the Bible is a story interwoven together. It's going to take a second, but we need to move through it just a bit. Paul says this. Here's where his controversy happens. He says this, Romans 4, 1 and 5. What then shall we say that Abraham, that's a familiar name, they're using the same God to make their own points. What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? He's talking about faith, right? Salvation, all those things, right? Talking about the same stuff. If in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God, who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. In other words, he's saying, look, if you've got to do things, if you've actually got to have blood involved in things, and it's just not a heartbeat, then all of a sudden you're working and God owes you a paycheck, and that paycheck comes in grace. That's what he's saying, right? That's what Paul is attempting to say here. You know? God's obligated to give it to you. That you try your best, you still fall short. It doesn't mean that our faith, right, isn't any good. Paul and James are dealing with two different groups of people. So follow me for a moment. In Matthew 19, Paul's dealing with this kind of man. A guy comes to Jesus, and he says, Jesus, I've followed all the laws, right? I followed all of the laws, all of them. And so what do I need to do? What's next? He's having this conversation with Jesus. He's leveraging this resume that he brings with him. He's like, hey, look how great this resume looks, of how attention to detail I am. Look at this. This is fantastic. It's a great little resume. What else you got going? And Jesus responds to him. He says, hey, if you really want to be perfect, go sell everything you have and then come follow me. Right? So that guy was looking for something to boast about. He came to Jesus, first thing out of his mouth. Let me tell you what I've done. Right? Let me tell you what I've done. That's the audience Paul's dealing with. A group of folks that have seen a list of laws, a list of requirements, and they're checking them off with a box, and they're saying, look what I've done so that I can achieve something. Well, James isn't talking about that person or to those people. He's talking to a different group of people. A group of people that have come to Christianity for an easy A. You see, the group that Paul's talking to, they don't want an easy A. They're like, as long as you give me the list, I don't care how strenuous it will be, I'll check the box. Because I want to show you that I can check the box. And James is talking to the people who took weightlifting in high school, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, just need an easy A. Like, hey, I don't want to sit in class. I don't want to do a bunch of studying. I just sign me up for weightlifting because I'm pretty sure they don't like do anything in there, right? You just go in there and you hang out, you talk, you tell jokes, and I don't know, you pretend you lift weights, and then you're done, right? So the audiences are completely different. Completely different. It's someone looking for an easy way out. It's someone that's trying to check into a religious system that just says, I can do what I want and live how I want, and grace will cover me. How does it make you feel when you watch someone take advantage of someone who's incredibly kind? You know what I'm talking about? Like maybe it was your grandmother who's just so kind, or I don't know, maybe you got a sibling, or maybe it was you. Hey man, your heart's so big, you're just so giving, you're so gullible. People can talk you into anything, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I gave away everything we had, and we can't pay the bills. But those people can, because Yeah. Have you ever watched someone go back to that same well over and over again? That's kind of like what James was watching. He's like, look, people, God's got a big old heart, but if you think that he's not smart enough to pick up what you're trying to put down, this fake easy A thing, get it through your head. God's not gullible. You might read a little bit and pick and choose here and there and think, I can slide under the radar. I can say the right things. I can believe even how the demons in the Bible believe, and I'll slide in there. The rest of it, we'll get to it when we get to it. Or maybe we won't. And James is saying, don't sleep on God. This issue is one of the most complicated issues in the entire Bible. This is what I know. This is what I know. Did you notice where Abraham's faith was truly discovered? We mentioned it a little bit earlier. Did you notice where he discovered his real faith? Where God made it known for his real faith? It was in his identity. When God wanted to know what kind of faith Abraham actually had, he went to the core of who Abraham actually was. Up until that time, this is the example that both Paul and James use. He had conversations with God. He believed that God had a great plan to change and save the world. He even believed God was going to use him to do it. But the moment that God acknowledges this idea that's happening in front of us, it's when he gets to the core of who Abraham was. When he said, hey, will you give me your pride and joy? Can I have that? What's your identity? Where should God ask you to explore whether you really have faith? Will God find faith in your identity? In the thing you value most that makes you who you are? Is there faith lurking there? Is faith welcome there? And again, we're looking at faith from a biblical perspective. The heart and blood pumping together. Not lip service. Not a list of things I can boast and brag about. But the two meshing together. Will you find faith in your identity? I'll tell you this. Faith is the crazy that allows us to trust God more than we trust ourselves. Faith is the crazy that allows us to trust God more than we trust ourselves. And when it comes to the thing that's most valuable to you in your life, that thing that you've waited for 2.5 decades, the thing that defines who your life is, that's where faith ought to begin. Because if you're willing to allow God to lead in that moment, in that area, both in thought and how you live and follow, both in intellectual decisions and in actual actions, when those two things mesh in your identity, then everything else from there becomes a little simpler, right? If you begin at the core of who you are, if you begin at the core of what makes you who you are, and you say, God, you have free reign. And this is the thing, the faith is the crazy that's going to say, you know what, I don't even know if I agree or believe with what you want to do with the core of who I am, but I'm going to follow you anyway. That's where the faith is. I'm going to say it, I'm going to think it, and I'm actually going to put some action to it. And those two things, heart, pumping blood, in and out, back and forth, all over the body, faith comes alive. It's not something that happens just here. It's not something that just happens here. It's the blending and the mixing of two. As a church, we have made faith incredibly complicated. And that's because we've had leaders in our church that have abused the gift of the Bible. At one point in our history, we had people selling the right to go to heaven. We had people that would line up in the streets and they would bring everything they had to pay a church to get their deceased brother or father or mother out of hell and into heaven. And to combat that, we said, hey, this is enough. You can't earn what God's giving. When we read the Bible, we read things like Paul, and it's just this free gift, so you don't have to do anything. You just have to have this intellectual decision. That's it. It was to combat the other side of the pendulum. And so the pendulum was over here where you can pay to get out of hell, and then it swung all the way over here where it's like, well, as long as you just think good, happy thoughts about Jesus, grace will be enough. And here in the middle, we have this. It's a complicated issue. And if I could solve it on a Sunday morning right now in this moment, it would change the world, but I can't do that. It's complicated. It's like, what's the source of life? Our heart beating or the blood that it pumps? You can make an argument for both, but here's the thing you can't make an argument about. You can't live without one or the other. You got to have them both. And I'll tell you what, anybody who really wants to come face to face with God is not going to bring out their resume when they come in His presence. What am I going to do? Well, God, let me tell you how many sermons I preached. Let me tell you how many people I talked to Jesus about. And He's like, yeah, I gave birth and knit in together every single person that ever walked on the planet. I put something inside of them that still looks to me before you ever open your mouth. That's what He says. Oh, and I hung the stars and the moon. And I'm spinning them all while listening to your prayers, the faithful ones and the unfaithful ones, and the ones that are unspoken at the same time. And while I'm arguing with you, I'm still taking care of the world. Faith is complicated. And it requires a little crazy. But it's worth it. It's worth it. Let's find our faith. Let's find it. Let's find where the heart and blood mix together and begin to pump to give life. Let's find it. For some of you, let's rediscover it. Maybe you put it on a shelf because you said, oh, that hard work days, those are behind me. I'm going to put it in this shelf and I'll get back to it. I'll pull it out and I got to stand before God. And maybe it's time to stand before God. Let's do it. Can we pray that prayer? And your will be done on earth as it is in heaven? That doesn't happen by us just having conversations and thinking about it. It requires faith. Here's the truth. Day by day, you become more and more like what you have faith in. Because your faith is who you are. Oh, I hope you hear that this morning. Day by day, you become more like what you have faith in. Because your faith is who you are. What you believe and what you do. Those two things mixed together, that's where your faith is, and that's who you are. For some of us, we just have faith in ourselves. Or maybe we have faith in a parent, or grandparent, or mentor. Or maybe we've lost faith in every single person around us because they've disappointed us over and over again. If that's what it takes for you to put your faith in Jesus, honestly, it's still a good trade. If the whole world has disappointed you, but it leads you to a place where you say, what I believe and what I do will lead to Jesus, well done. But if you can avoid some of those heartaches and jump straight to it, good on you. Let's find our faith. Maybe you ask, well, how? How do I find my faith? 3 words. Pray, talk, jump. Pray about it. Go talk to God for a minute like he's real. In a second, we're going to give you an opportunity to pray a little bit. Just sit in your seat. There'll be things going on around you, but you can just pray. If you're new to church, let me pull back the veil for a little bit. You don't have to close your eyes when you pray. You don't even have to bow your head. As we're singing a song, or as you're sitting in your chair, those thoughts that are going, they're not just lifting to the ceiling and bouncing around and wherever. The creator of the universe is listening intently. And that moment, those of you, whoever you are in here that haven't talked to God in 2 decades or a decade or never, oh man, you want to see a smile on a dad's face? Say his name here or here? Yes, I've been waiting to hear your voice. I've been waiting on you. Talk to him like he's there. Then talk to someone else. Talk to someone that's here today, or that will be here next week, or that you know has a faith where what they believe and what they do are mixed together, and that's what they're following. Talk to that person and ask them. Say, hey, I think I want to discover faith. What do I do next? Just talk to them. 3rd thing, jump. Jump onto a team. We are not shameful, and what we say helps transform people's lives. It's serving. Jesus himself said, I didn't come to be served, though he has the resume to require it. He came to serve. Jump in. Because the team that you might land on might have the person that's going to have the conversation with you as you're doing whatever odd job or service that you're doing. Then that conversation might spur something that changes the direction of your life. Surround yourself with people of faith. Pray, talk, jump. Pray, talk, jump. Pray, talk, jump. Make a decision. Pump the blood, do something about it. And watch the 2 things come together. That's where you'll find your faith.